All right, well, good afternoon, everyone. It's 1 o'clock, so I just want to, go ahead and respect your time. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. We are excited to host the Southwest Development District Housing Needs Conversation. And my name is Dr. Chinduru. I'm the Director of Research and Planning at the Tennessee Housing Development Agency. This is my colleague, Sam Myers-Miller, and she and I will be hosting this conversation today. And we want to make sure that we're framing this correctly. This is a chance to really hear from all of you about the issues that you guys are facing, this community is facing when it comes to housing affordability and housing needs in the area. And I know that this region is about to experience a ton of change. I'm sure, as everyone in this room is well aware of that. And so that's one big reason I'm excited to be in Jackson today. I was here a year ago for a big conversation around Louisville City, which, it went okay. It was hard to kind of figure out what was happening. So we're really excited to kind of dive into the focus groups today and learn more about, what's been going on, what progress has been happening, but also what else is needed and how the state can best support you. But before we do that, we have a short presentation, hopefully short, to share a little bit about kind of what the data is saying around the needs and issues in this region. I want to acknowledge that this data is, what has happened up until now, but because of kind of the unique situation that Southwest is about to go through, most of this is about to be, kind of history in terms of trends and analysis. Before we get started, I'd like to thank Tom Skehan, who was instrumental in helping us organize this. He worked with our team to make sure that this went off without a hitch. So thank you, Tom, for being here and for helping us get this off the ground. So one acknowledgement, everyone in this room, I'm sure, has worked with the West Tennessee Planning Group. There is a similar event to this tomorrow. It's a virtual session that is being hosted by the West Tennessee Planning Group. And we would really encourage everyone in this room to also attend that session, which is at, I believe 1 p.m. tomorrow, but I'm not exactly sure. I apologize. Don't put me on that. I'm sure you can. It's at 10 a.m. Okay, great. Thank you. So, please think about tuning into that one as well. That will be complementary to today's presentation and meeting, because that presentation will be focused on kind of the future of this region and what is projected to happen, whereas this presentation and this conversation is more about what has happened so far and what is currently happening in the region. So a little bit about what brings us here today. This housing needs meeting is really about the consolidated plan. How many of you are familiar with the consolidated plan and what it is? Okay, a few of us. So I'll go over it really quickly. So the state of Tennessee's consolidated plan serves as the state's kind of appropriation or application for $50 to $60 million in HUD funding. And this comes from HUD, and the 5 programs that are funded through this, approximately $50 to $60 million are CDBG, which is the Community Development Block Grant, the Emergency Solutions Grant, the Home Program, the Housing Trust Fund, and HOPWA, which is the Housing Opportunities for People with AIDS. And these programs are administered by different agencies, which I'll talk about in a second. But this happens every 5 years. And so in addition to really thinking about how the money for these 5 programs is dispersed, we take this opportunity to really also understand more about housing needs across the state. So 5 years ago, we did similar kind of focus groups across the state. So in addition to this presentation and this conversation, we also administered a housing affordability survey and a housing needs survey that just closed at the end of July. And so we'll be kind of analyzing that data and releasing the results of that soon as well. So the 5 programs that I just mentioned, they are meant to target different needs across the state and different groups of people. CDBG is meant for projects in areas that benefit majority low-income households. So these are primarily infrastructure projects, things like building roads or building economic centers. That's really the intention of CDBG. At times, we have worked with varying levels of success to try to integrate housing and the community development block grant. I'd say right now we are struggling to kind of bring housing to the table when it comes to the use of CDBG money. Home funding is meant for administering funding to support both rental and home ownership opportunities for households whose incomes are below 80% AMI. And then the Housing Trust Fund is primarily meant to support rental housing opportunities for very low income households. So folks whose incomes are below the 30% AMI mark. And then the Emergency Solutions Grant, ESG, this money goes to help shelters and other services for homeless folks or people experiencing homelessness across the state. And then HOPWA funding is primarily for folks who are below 80% AMI and who are living with HIV or AIDS, or a member in the household is living with HIV or AIDS. The middle three programs are administered by our agency, the Tennessee Housing Development Agency. CDBG is administered by the Economic and Community Development Department of the state, ECD. And then HOPWA is administered by the Department of Health. And while these three agencies administer all 5 of these programs, THDA is responsible, specifically my team is responsible for the consolidated plan and developing this work. One thing, yes, go ahead, please.
So when you say 50 to 60 million, is there a set amount that you get for each program, or does THDA divide those dollars up?
That's a really great question. There is a set amount that HUD designates based on population, based on, need. So at times, for example, the state can write a letter to HUD that says, like, we need more CDBG funding, and HUD might take that into consideration and appropriate more funding towards CDBG than otherwise. And so there are things we could do to encourage more funding from HUD for specific programs, but that formula is designated by HUD. I want to acknowledge that Sam and I are not from Jackson, Tennessee. We've looked at the numbers, we've done the analysis, but we're not from here. We haven't spent much time here. And so, the statistics we might show you, or we're about to show you, they might feel misrepresentative of the story here. And that's what we want to hear about. We want to hear that, whether or not you feel like are we capturing the story correctly? What seems off? What seems to be missing here? And then, what is actually an accurate picture of what's happening? Especially as I, was preparing for this presentation, a lot of the statistics seem a little confusing given, what we know to be the need here. And that is an issue of the nature of statistics. First, we use the American Community Survey primarily, which is always a few years behind. So the most recent data we have is from 2022. That's already 2 years. A lot has changed in just that 2 years. A second thing to be thinking about is sampling error in small areas. So in especially rural counties, very few households are actually sampled of the total population. And so if one household is experiencing something, that might have an outsized impact on the overall statistic for that region. And so I want us to kind of keep that in mind as we go through this presentation, and especially in the Q&A, please let us know what you felt like, just didn't really hit the mark in terms of what you know to be the story around here. So the agenda today, we're going to do this brief presentation for you guys. We're going to have a little bit of time for Q&A about the presentation and what I just mentioned. And then really the second half will be spent on focus groups, and that'll be for the folks who joined us here in person. We will not be able to include the folks who are joining us virtually in those focus groups. We'll have 2 focus groups, one around housing affordability and one on homelessness, and both will consider how fair housing plays a role in that. When we think about the housing needs environment, our team really tries to think about all of these components. We try to think about the current population and households as well as their incomes. We try to think about what the current housing supply looks like and how that interacts with housing prices. And then we also think about the future population and households, and that's something that's really important for this region. Things are about to change dramatically. So what does that mean for housing need around here? And then what does that mean for future housing supply? What do we see coming down the pipe? And then finally, how all of this contributes to housing instability, especially for the most vulnerable populations in the region. The framework we're going to be using today is a 3-part framework. We're going to be thinking about what the region looks like today. So who lives here, what comprises the current housing supply, and how much housing costs. Then we'll be thinking about what housing is actually needed and how do we know that we need it. And then what happens if that housing isn't built. And so in terms of the strategies for what might enable us to build the housing and what strategies might enable us to address the current instability, that's the stuff we're going to get into in our focus group. Let's start with current population, households, and the household incomes of the region. So the Southwest region is one of the least populous regions of the state. No surprise, GNRC, the Greater Nashville Regional Council, has the most dense population in the state. The Southwest region has about 251,000 people as of our last count. Again, that's going to change dramatically. So over the last 5 years, that population has remained largely stable. It's only increased by about 0.5%. So we haven't seen a decline or a real increase. 0.5% is barely anything. Whereas other regions like the Northwest region right above us and the Mid-South region to the west of us have experienced a slight decline in population. In comparison, GNRC has increased by almost 11% in the region. The gray blobs that you might see behind this map right here, those are the urbanized areas. So that shows where density or population density is across the state. So you'll see the Southwest region has a big, giant, urban area right in Jackson, right there, right where we are in Madison County, but then also a few smaller kind of urban clusters. When we kind of zoom in on a county level, that story is pretty standard across the board. Madison's population has increased by less than a percentage point, and we have about 98,000 people that live in this county. But the other surrounding counties have either experienced a slight increase or a slight decrease. Hardin County here has actually experienced a 4% increase. I want to pay specific attention to Hardin County. It shows an interesting story. And Haywood County has gone down by about 1%. And so we're looking at data from 2017 to 2022. So it's a 5-year lapse. Demographically, this region is very distinct compared to the rest of the state. And so the senior population in this region, oh wow, those graphics did not project well compared to the actual time. Yeah, I apologize, y'all. So the dark blue bar is the 65 plus population here. In the state overall, about 17% of the population is above 65. In this region, it's 19%. So we have a higher representation of older folks that live in the region. And then the population of children is about 24.5% here in the region. And so we might be, up until now, we might be seeing kind of an aging population in this region. That might change with Blue Oval City as we're getting folks in that mid-adult age kind of moving in as a part of the workforce here.
And what's the children's percentage in that difference?
This, I believe, trends similar to other parts of the state. The problem is the Southwest region, it obviously contributes to the statewide average, right? So like if you look at the Mid-South region, for example, the elderly population is closer to like 13 or 14%. So in the Memphis region, so we have this region is, considered to be aging in comparison to the Mid-South, but overall, compared to the overall state, it's not that much different. Racially, the composition here is also very distinct. The percent of the state, so Black folks in the percent of the state make up about 16%. In this region, they make up about 25%. So we have a much larger representation of Black people in this region than across the state. White people make up about 68% of the region. And then Hispanic people make up about 3.4%. And then all other races, unfortunately, there just isn't much of a representation of other racial groups. That's why they're kind of compressed into that all other races group. But they make up about 3.4% of this region here. Income wise, the middle household in this region, so like the household right at the median, the 50% household is making about $50,000 a year. And so exactly half the population falls below that threshold and about half falls above that threshold. I want us to keep that number in mind, 50,000, as we get into the rest of the statistics here today. And then the other thing to keep in mind is that the majority of households in this region are owners, just like the state. Overall, we are a home ownership state. We are not a rental state. 68.5% of the households here are owners compared to 31.5% of the renters. And so I want us to keep that income number in mind and then this household tenure breakdown in mind. So I mentioned the home ownership rate in the Southwest region is 68.5%. That's about in the middle range compared to the rest of the state. The highest level of home ownership is in the South Central region. So that's like, Williamson County, Columbia, Tennessee, those areas right there. About 74% of folks are homeowners. The Mid-South region, so the Memphis area, only about 57% of folks in that region are homeowners. So this region is falling right in the middle. When we look at the demographics of renters and owners, we see a very distinct story. So renters tend to be younger. More than 80% of renters are below 65 years old, whereas only about 60% of homeowners fall below the age of 65. And so in this region in particular, you're looking at almost 40% of the population of homeowners are above 65, which, when we think about whether or not folks who are aging can actually maintain and upkeep their home and do the type of work that's required or have the income that's required to maintain a home, these are the things to consider when we think about the quality of the housing and the housing stock in the region. Demographically, we see a overrepresentation of Black people among renters. So I said that about 24% of the overall region is Black in this area, but 44% of renters in this region are Black, and they only make up 16% of homeowners. White folks are overrepresented among homeowners. 81% of homeowner households are white households, and only 51% of renters are 50% of rental households are white. Income-wise, the income spread here is very interesting. So renters, nothing surprising here. Remember that median income for households across this region is $50,000. So that means 50% of all the households make $50,000 or below, but 70% of renters make $50,000 or below. And so only about 30% of your renters are making above $50,000 a year. But when we look at the owner spread, it's a much more evenly distributed spread, which means that home ownership seems to be pretty equally represented across the income bands. So we're looking at about, 40% of homeowners are making below $50,000, which is pretty unheard of compared to the rest of the state. And so that's just something interesting to keep in mind and to be thinking about, is that being a homeowner here, it might not elude people in the lower income bands. And so that, I will say, when I was looking at, analysis across the state, this really stood out to me, kind of the even distribution of home ownership across income bands. And this is what I'd like to learn more about in our focus groups too. Is this something, is this an accurate representation of what's going on here?
Excuse me,
Yes, sir.
you are talking about, like, when you refer to homeowners, you're talking about the total income in that house, right?
Yes, sir. Household income. That's right. Yeah, not an individual. Yeah. Another way to look at income is through area median income. Area median income shows us kind of how So $50,000 here means something different than 50,000 in Greater Nashville, right? And so that's why we look at the area median income. And so the 100% AMI here is $50,000, about that. When we look at homeowners, more than half of homeowners are making above that income threshold, whereas only about 22% of renters are making that income or higher. So even though the income spread of homeowners is even, more than half are still in that upper income band. And so that's something also to kind of be thinking about. Let's talk a little bit about current housing supply. So we've looked at the population trends and incomes. So now we're going to take a look at, what's going on with the housing stock. One way we look at the supply of housing is we have to think about it as a continuum. The type of housing we need as we go through life changes. When we're in our 20s, we need a different type of housing than we might need in our 30s and 40s if we're growing families. And then in our elder years when we, are empty nesters and we might not need all the space that we needed in our 30s and 40s. That's one way to think about the life cycle of housing. Another way to think about it is that our incomes might change throughout our lifetime. And they might change for families as they go through, life stages. And so there are different types of services and types of housing that we need to be thinking about for each AMI band. And this isn't to say that this is exactly, how things play out, but we do know that people who are making whose incomes are below 30% AMI are more likely to be homeless or more likely to need supportive services. That's not a one-to-one correlation, but that is, that's what the trends say. When we move up the income band a little bit, we can see that there are folks that might be, more in need of affordable rental housing. So folks who are making between 30 and 80% AMI are the people that might be most eligible for affordable rental housing. So what I mean by that are housing that's subsidized by government subsidies or other forms of local or state credits. So that includes a low-income housing tax credit, that includes home, NHTF, et cetera. Home ownership is really only available for folks who are making at or above, whose incomes are at or above 80% AMI. It's very hard to get folks below that income band into an affordable home. Now, that is how the nation kind of thinks about home ownership. But I just showed you statistics that suggest something completely different, right? That there are people at all income bands that are living in homes and own homes. And so this might not be actually representative of what's going on here. When we think about market rate housing, that's really for people, market rate rental housing, that's for people making above 80% AMI, and then market rate home ownership, so conventional loans, that's really for folks at or above the 100% AMI band. And there are things in our life that can move us up or down this continuum, right? There are events, circumstances, like climate change and natural disasters that can destroy somebody's home, and there might not be anywhere for that person to live. Access to amenities and job opportunities can move people upwards on the continuum. So this is, when our team is thinking about housing, we're not thinking about it as an isolated thing. We're thinking about how it fits into the whole ecosystem of the area. In the Southwest region, 74% of the housing stock are single family homes, basically, that we call them 1-unit detached homes, but that's your standard single family home. A very small portion are multifamily or kind of duplex type homes. What's interesting here is that about 13% of the homes are mobile homes. So I'd be curious to know if you believe that the folks who might be living there are the ones that are likely less, on the lower bands of the income range.
Those weren't included in 74%, 13%.
That's correct. They're separated out. Yeah, mobile homes do not count as single family homes. Yeah. That means only about 12% of the housing stock here are, multifamily or kind of duplex or triplex types of homes. So why are we in this situation today? Why do we not have enough homes? Why are there not the right types of homes here? Nationally, it's because of the events that have occurred for the last 15 years. So this is a graph from the Urban Institute that shows how multifamily, single family and manufactured home starts completely had a complete drop off right around 2006 and 2007, right before the Great Recession. And we've never really caught up. We are now back at a level that's getting closer to pre-recession levels of starts. But that also means we have this, decades long backlog of housing that just has not been built. What does that mean for this region? If housing is not being built, that means that the existing housing we have is getting older, and aging housing is a big problem. The median age of rental housing in this region is very old. Compared to the rest of the state, Haywood County, Hardeman County, McNairy County, and Decatur County are among the counties with the oldest rental housing. Madison County, the average age of rental housing here is 44 years old. Chester County has the most recent rental housing. I'd be curious to know why that is so low there. It might be because there's not that many units. I'm not sure.
Yes, that is correct.
That's correct. Okay.
There's a college there, college.
Ah.
Retirement.
That's good to know.
We need more temporary housing, like for a year or 2 year apartment complex.
Yeah.
We got a lot of people moving in from other states. There's nothing to rent. They're going buying travel trailers and putting on their properties until they can build, even if it's a couple of years.
Yeah. No, that makes sense. That would help explain some of this, I guess. Yeah.
I think that's underrepresented because there's not rental housing there. There's very low, there's a few duplexes. I would
In
say.
Chester County.
Yeah, it's probably been built within the past 30 years, and that's probably why it appears that way.
Yeah. That makes sense.
My computer is just not working.
Okay.
Could I log
Yeah.
into yours?
Absolutely. Hold on one second, guys. We're having a tech issue here. All right, for those of us joining virtually, we are having a bit of a tech issue. We will be back online. Just a second. All right.
Thank you. Look at how it's like. Great.
Where am I?
I can do it.
Yeah. Thank you. All right. Thank you for your patience. So that is like interesting context because when we look at the median age of owner housing, it looks much younger here, much newer here compared to rental housing. The median age for owner housing in Madison is only 35 years old, which might suggest that there's newer housing that's actually being built here. I'm not sure. Or if older housing is being demolished. Newer housing is being built. Okay. Haywood and Hardeman County still have pretty old owner housing. The median age is around 45 years for Haywood County.
We do like our historic homes there.
That's good to know.
Some of them are 1850.
That is really good to know. Okay.
So actually, in all seriousness, Brownsville has some of the most historic, like old historic homes like that for a small town.
That's great context. Yeah, and thank you for bringing that up because this doesn't incorporate renovations, right? So some of these old homes might actually be in great quality because they've been renovated or maintained over time. And unfortunately for, rural counties especially, we have a hard time getting our hands on that type of data to try to understand the quality of the housing, though we're working on some other data sources.
Is there a way to
Go ahead. Yeah, that's fine.
code enforcement?
Yes, that's their data and codes data is what we're trying to, get our handle on kind of and get a better read on the actual housing stock around here. Yeah. We have our GIS expert here who might be getting into that soon.
four communities that have historic zoning are Brownsville, Bolivar, Jackson, Madison County, and Savannah.
Okay, Brownsville, Bolivar, Jackson, Madison, and Savannah.
Right.
Great. So, so this is actually great. Thank you guys for your input, because this is, when I'm talking about the statistics not being truly representative of what's going on, this is what I mean here. So we talked a little bit about the current housing supply. Let's talk a little bit about housing prices. Median rents across this region have skyrocketed. We're looking. And this is 2022 data. So this is already out of date, right? So the median rent in 2022 was about $1,000 in Madison, which was a 20% jump from just 5 years ago. And I'm sure it's significantly higher now. In Haywood County, that rent is about $715, Hardeman $773, Henderson $759. If you look at the fact that Hardeman, Henderson, and Hardin County and McNairy County, and Decatur County have had rent increases of more than 20% over the last 5 years. And that is obviously a huge burden on folks whose incomes might not be rising at that level.
So if those median rents are wrong, do you want us to tell you?
Yeah.
Okay, so in Haywood County, I'll give you an example, we had an elderly lady and her rent was like $650. And when her lease ran out, they backed it up double.
We're seeing rents double on a consistent basis.
Double year to year.
And so people people can't stay because they can't afford their rent. And so they're doubling up with their family, they're doing travel trailers.
Yeah. And and our data is it's gonna take time for that to catch up. So is that happening just in Haywood County across?
Madison County, is that 900, is that considered a 3-bedroom?
That's just the median overall,
Okay, so now it's 16 and
16 and up
yes.
for just like a 1-bedroom,
three-bedroom.
a 3-bedroom. Okay.
1 bedroom for $900 to $1,000.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Well, thank you. That's very helpful to know. Home sales. Now, I said median rents were bad. Home sales are out of control here. This is the largest increase, probably some of the largest increases across the state in terms of home prices. So looking at our home sales data, the median home in Madison County sold for $220,000 in 2022. That is a 63% increase over 5 years. So since then, yeah. Yeah, and we're about to analyze 2023 data, so this might be, even more dramatic. In Hardin County, the median home sale was selling for $200,000 in 2022, another 63% increase. McNairy County had a 78% increase over 5 years. And so this type of change is drastic for a home sales market. It's nothing you guys don't know about, right? But
What does that do to the state?
these are some of the highest rates across the state. This legend right here shows you the changes across the state. So there are places that have had more than 120% increase. So in the greater Nashville region area, for example, prices have doubled. But we are in the Southwest region, this is probably one of the fastest changing regions across the state.
And how does that compare nationally to stats nationally?
I can't tell you off the top of my head, but these are people have kind of talked about Tennessee being in a housing bubble, and this is kind of what we're seeing here. We're not exactly sure if this is sustainable, this type of growth. I don't believe it is. And so we might see a flattening of prices. But again, not really the case for this region because of the growth that you're about to experience. And so unfortunately, I don't have those off the top of my head.
There's an article in the Wall Street Journal yesterday.
Yeah.
It actually gave the percentage growth on housing cost, insurance, because homeowners insurance is also a
Right.
big part of it.
Exactly. Yeah.
And in
So-
Haywood County, you may have more inflation of land prices.
That's why we have no homes because.
Because those land landowners in Haywood are so evil.
Sam, did you get that?
Yeah.
We know you said
state, but not only is there a shortage of housing inventory, those homes are being bought by people from the West Coast. And so they have artificially.
They're
increased those
outbidding.
Prices because $1 million home in California is, 1,100 square feet. So they can come here and buy 3 houses for that. And a lot of them are doing that and they're making it a rental house. So that's really, it's taken the housing inventory down and inflated the prices because we've had such an influx of people from outside the area.
Right. Yeah. Yes.
Y'all notice that in y'all's county, well, I know what they would ask.
Well, I actually live in Memphis and we've seen them come in and buy 1,000 at a time. And some of the owners are out of country. They're not US.
The investor groups coming in and buying all rental property.
Thank you, everyone. I have Sam writing down all of these notes. I want to kind of dive into the specifics in our focus group so that we can actually get into maybe the root causes and try to incorporate that into our analysis. So we talked a little bit about kind of what the region looks like. I want to switch gears and think about what housing is needed in the region. And again, the Blue Oval presentation tomorrow will be a stronger analysis of those projections, but we've done a bit of a cursory analysis. And the way we think about what housing is needed is we think about cost burden. And where's the compression happening for renters and homeowners? So across the state, we looked at cost burden households. So these are renter households who pay more than 30% of their income towards housing costs, 30% of their gross income. And so that includes rent, that includes utilities, anything related to housing. In the Southwest region, 44% of renter households are considered cost burdened. And nationally, that number is 50%. So compared to the rest of the country, a little bit better here per the data. But again, we're hearing that that's not necessarily the case. And this data is, not super representative. In the Mid-South region right next to us, that number is 49%. So, this is a very cost burden part of the state. But as you can tell, that case, that's not the case necessarily for the rest of the state. So like South Central, Upper Cumberland, Southeast, East, and First, those numbers are 40% or below. And so those are significantly below the national average of 50%. When we look at the percent change in rental cost burden, this number has remained relatively stable. So even if rental prices have gone up, our analysis suggests that maybe incomes have increased a little bit to match that, so that cost burden remains low. I don't know, I'm seeing all the skepticism in the room, and that's very helpful. But compared to the rest of the state, you see those cost burden numbers look very different. In the GNRC region, it went up by 17%. And then in First over in East Tennessee, it actually went down by 11%. When we disaggregate that down to a county level, that story is not as consistent. So in Madison County, cost burden has increased by 12%. So now more than half of renters in Madison County are considered cost burden. In Haywood County, approximately 43 to 44% of renters are cost burden, and those numbers have increased. And so the darker red counties right here are the most cost burdened compared to the rest of the state. So that's kind of a way to think about how this lands compared to Tennessee. In Henderson, Hardin, and McNairy County, those numbers are around 30%. And then in Chester County, that number is 34%. Decatur has the lowest amount of cost burden, 29%. Again, this could be a function of the fact that there just aren't that many renters in these areas anyway, as we learned about Chester County. Severe cost burden is when households are paying 50% or more of their income towards rental households. So this is an extreme case. This is very concerning, right? If you're paying half or more of your income towards rent. In the Southwest region, a fifth of the population here is severely cost burdened as of our last data here. Compared to the rest of the state, that's pretty high. only right behind the Mid-South region, which is Memphis. That number though, see, again, an interesting story. It looks like it's declined over the last 5 years, but let's get into why it might have declined by 12% in the region. In Madison County, that number's gone up. So more than a quarter of the population in this county is severely cost burdened, but that number has significantly declined in McNairy, in Henderson, in Decatur, Chester, et cetera, and even a little bit in Haywood County. And so this is the kind of stuff that I need y'all's kind of, you know, thinking about and bring.
People.
That could be what's happening, but you'd have to kind of tell me.
And a lot of them.
Hmm, the folks that were severely cost burdened. Yeah. And so that
could be,
so it looks like it's declining, but not really.
right, it's not.
Yeah. My biggest concern about today's presentation is that the data just doesn't accurately capture what's going on. And, you know, that's what we're hoping to add as much qualitative input into our analysis as possible.
When is that data from?
This is a 5-year change from 2017 to 2022. So let's talk a little bit about homeowners. We talked about renters. With homeowners, we think about cost burden a little bit differently. A lot of homeowners don't even pay a mortgage, right? They've already paid out their mortgage. So the way we think about whether or not homes are affordable is that we developed something called a homeowner opportunity index. The way this index is calculated is the idea is of all the homes that were sold in the last year, what percentage of them would have been affordable to that median household? And across the state, so let's talk about Nashville, for example. Only 30% of the homes in Nashville that were sold last year or 2 years ago were affordable to the median household. In the Southwest region, 63% of the homes sold would have been affordable to the median household. So it looks theoretically better down here than in Nashville. But again, this could be a supply issue. Like just because the homes sold were affordable doesn't mean there's actually homes to sell to the median household, right? The Southwest region is right now the second most affordable region, right behind the Northwest region when it comes to homeownership. County by county, that number also varies. So in Haywood County, 82% of homes are considered affordable to the median household. In Madison County, only 56%. But even that affordability, you'll see those downward facing triangles, it has gone down over the last 5 years. And so homeownership has become less accessible across every county in the region. In McNairy County, it's gone down by 22 points. And in Madison County, it's gone down by 27.5 points. So even just 5 years ago, homes were significantly more affordable here. So then what happens if this housing isn't built? What does housing instability look like? Who's experiencing it? And I'm sorry, can you tell me your name?
Me?
Yes, Shatara. Shatara mentioned that homelessness has gone up. What I'm about to show you shows the lag in our data here. And so we are going to be, when we look at homelessness, we have to look at it with the best available data that we have, which is data at the continuum of care level. And so those are, you know, a network of supportive services that provide homeless services to folks across the state. This region falls in the Jackson, West Tennessee COC. That's 507 right there. Those, the light blue and dark blue clusters right there. And so we're gonna, you know, even though the Southwest region is only a small portion of this, we're gonna look at data that encompasses that region. This graph shows the point in time count. This is the best available data we have on sheltered and unsheltered homelessness. Those of us that work with homelessness issues in this room are aware of the flaws in this data. This is a significant undercount no matter what. It involves people, volunteers going out once a year and literally counting the number of people they might see that are unsheltered. And then we also do a survey of sheltered homelessness to try to see, how many folks are experiencing homelessness on one night in January of each year. The dashed lines in the middle right there signify the counts that happened during the pandemic years. We just are not very sure of those numbers. That was a rough time for service providers. This data suggests that homelessness has declined across the board. And it suggests that to be the case for Black people as well as children, which are the two subgroups that are most vulnerable when we think about homeless people across the state. This does not take into account folks who might be experiencing homelessness by being doubled up, couch surfing, people who are just living out of their cars, maybe. They might not be counted visually. And so this is all the qualifiers in place. This is the best data we have, but again, that's why we need the qualitative input so that we can say this is not an accurate representation of what's happening. I'm sorry, you had your hand raised.
So I'm with the COC.
Yes, oh, great,
HMAS lead.
fantastic.
But there was a 20% increase this year
Okay,
on our pit account.
all right,
And we changed nothing in our COVID pit counts.
okay,
We still did it exactly the same.
okay. Thank you for that input. Yeah, so you mean the 2024 numbers have gone up by 20%?
20%.
Okay. Yeah, I'm not sure why. I think we haven't received all the COC counts for 24. That's why we weren't able to incorporate this into the state analysis. But we'll make a note of that. Are there other types of homelessness we're seeing that that are, unique to this region that we should be thinking about or considering?
So the unsheltered is much harder to count for us because we don't have shelter.
Okay,
And it's so rural in certain areas. You literally have to know. I mean, we get a much better count in Jackson, I think, too. And especially Decatur County. Because it's very rural. And there's some areas like you're not even allowed.
gotcha.
They stop at the gate.
So you won't even know what's
Yeah.
going on. So demographically of the pit count that we do have, we were able to break down the age composition. And so in the overall COC, 19% of the population is above 65. In the pit count, only 11% of the folks experiencing homelessness were above 65. Children were also underrepresented in that group. Again, children homelessness, those of you that work in this world know that just looks very different than how pit counts are conducted. Racially, the overrepresentation of Black people in the pit count is of note here. 33.5% of the folks counted were Black. All other races, 8% of the pit count fell into that category. And then, compared to the COC, that's a significant overrepresentation where Black people make up 19% of the overall population and all other races make up 2.5%. Hispanic people were underrepresented in the pit count compared to the rest of the COC.
So I'll say on that. Like I said, Jackson is the city where we get a really good count. And we do it in January when Remethian is open. Jackson has a higher percentage of African Americans. And overall, then the Lake County looks completely different than Madison County. So we're actually doing some data analysis on taking it into like 6 different regions. So it captures the better data. And but so with the African American count being higher, it's because it's being counted in Jackson.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
That makes sense. The last piece of analysis that we're going to show you is what cost burden looks like in specific areas of concentrated poverty. So when we think about instability, the people most likely to experience housing instability They're all within close proximity of each other, a lot of them. The two, you might not be able to see this, but there are two census tracts. Sorry, maybe three census tracts here, right in the middle of Madison County, that are considered concentrated areas of poverty, and that's a HUD-defined definition. And so that means 40% or more of the households there fall below the federal poverty line, which is an extremely low threshold. Those three areas are also the most likely to be cost burden, so that you'll see that they're kind of dark purple. That means between 30 and 100% of the households there are cost burden. And actually, it's closer to almost 100% of the households. So these three census tracts are experiencing both extreme poverty, but also extreme cost burden in terms of how much they're paying towards their housing costs. Those three census tracts also happen to be racially concentrated areas of poverty, which is another HUD-defined definition. In those three census tracts, between 93 and 97% of the heads of household are part of minority groups, and that means any racial minority. So that brings us to the Q&A, and I want to thank everybody for kind of chiming in and already asking questions and offering context. But I'd like to hear more generally, you know, what questions or comments do you have about this data? What did you notice in it? What seemed to be accurate? What seemed beyond, you know, what you guys have already kind of shared with us, seemed off in terms of how we captured this information and what's missing?
Carrie said mine.
Okay, no, yeah, that's great. Are there better ways to capture homelessness data here outside of the PIT count that we're not aware of?
Mhm. So we have coordinated entry,
Coordinated
and all
entry?
of that goes through our HMIS system, and
Okay.
that's people who have been verified as homeless by outreach workers, and then they're putting this system, and then we get that better data
Okay,
throughout the year, and not just on one night. But those are people who prevent that are asking for assistance, so there's still that group that doesn't want assistance. That get identified at the point.
great.
And there are no shelters, our shelter is hotel vouchers,
Okay,
usually paid by ESG funds. So when our agencies don't get awarded ESG, we don't have hotel funds. And we have a 9-by-9 shelter, and then the city of Jackson soon, hopefully, we'll be opening a men's shelter.
How many beds is that shelter in?
Well, that's kind of in the air right now. Now, it should be 20 to 25 for sure, minimum. Say that. But very well be more.
so what I heard a few pieces of feedback, so a lot around homelessness and really making sure we're capturing that, especially, you know, thinking about how cost burden is contributing to homelessness.
How was it domestic there?
Domestic violence. Okay, can you tell me more about that?
Okay, so we deal with the participant who comes in who has fled
Okay,
from their home, even if their husband was trying.
yeah, so they don't get counted as a part of the, okay, it's part of the shelter, but you're seeing a rise in that or an uptick in that? Okay,
On both ways. So we see some that are coming in for domestic violence. We might have a few for sexual assault, but sometimes lately we've just been getting, more of the homeless population.
Great.
It's just been reaching out to us.
thank you. Any other kind of questions or comments on analytic portion of this presentation. Yes, please.
So, and I'm trying to remember what slide. or-
Sure, I can move back.
how to
Yeah.
word it. But, I know, you said like the home ownership rate was higher. I feel like that may be because, we do have a higher aging population that
Mhm.
maybe had already purchased their home and paid for it.
Right.
But we operate the emergency repair program. I probably get at least 10 phone calls a day of people needing repairs to their home, but they can't afford the repairs because they are on a fixed income.
Right.
So I feel like, that's what I see at our agency is one of the greatest needs.
Yeah.
Is, trying to maintain the housing stock that exists.
When we would all agree with that. Okay, so getting a better read on the quality of the housing stock, I think it sounds like an important part of this.
Because one of the factors is you're not looking at safe and affordable housing. You're
Right.
just looking at affordable.
Right.
It may be below code, it may be unsafe. And, I wish we had a program just dedicated to that, targeting the elderly and older homes, because that's gonna become the housing stock for first-time buyers. And if, I can't speak for anybody but myself, but if you're looking at being a first-time home buyer, you're not necessarily looking at something that's gonna cost you what you think is an inflated price, and then on top of that, there's $50,000 to $60,000 worth of repairs.
You can get a mortgage on that.
Right,
Okay.
Can't get a decent mortgage on it. You should get this inspection.
right.
I think throughout the country, or, I'll say West Tennessee and Northeast Arkansas, the availability of what, in my day, we call the starter home. There's just not a lot out there.
Yeah,
It's just not. And
there's no stock
there
period.
is no
Yeah,
stock for starter home.
right.
And so it pushes people into little parents, waiting, trying to save, or just getting something that really doesn't. They compromise safety.
Yeah.
It's just really hard.
That's right.
That makes sense. Okay, let's, go ahead, sorry.
No, I was just gonna say, if they could come up with some law to protect that renter from reporting code violations, because they're not reporting because they don't want to be evicted.
Right.
And so, if there's some way that, it's a minimum of 6 months before a landlord can evict, if there's any code violation found, regardless, unless he can prove like they didn't pay their rent or think something like that. But there should be a minimum time limit after that code is reported.
Yeah.
Because they just use an excuse for, well, they have too many people at the house, or, we just want our property back. But people are afraid to report it because they don't want to be evicted because they can't find another unit.
Yeah.
So there's that issue, and there's been a tenant bill of rights proposed at the federal level and other levels. Look at that is the landlord's gonna look at them and say, okay, well, you're right, I need to repair that, but now I'm gonna add that to your rent. So the risk has always been. I'm the one that passed the Neighborhood Preservation Act. Y'all have ever read that in the state? That's my baby. Some of the things around that. And we've always had this balance of cost versus, what's affordable for the tenants. And I don't know how we fix it. It's so frustrating.
Yeah.
Because that's where you see the landlord say, sure, I'm not gonna keep you out. I don't want to double your rent.
So I want to save some of this for the focus group. So if there aren't any other questions about, the statistics and the analysis we presented, I'm going to try to capture what I've heard so far, which is that this data, as I suspected, is not extremely representative of what's going on here, and things have changed already dramatically. And it just takes time for, publicly available census data to catch up with what's going on. Did you have a thought? Sorry.
I was gonna say also, I add something to,
Sure.
a lot of landlords now, and that's got a lot to do with the home is going on, is they want you to make 3 times the rent. That is what,
Upfront.
yes, the 3 times the rent.
Yeah.
And then the house is $2,200 a month.
You mean that's the security deposit?
No, ma'am. That's what the rent is here now. At the 3 bedrooms, if you wanna be, like you were saying about you accepting things that's not safe,
Yeah.
you want something safe, it's 1,800, 2,200, and they want you to make 3 times that rent. So we have a hard time trying to get our participants in our housing.
And the application.
Right, you then you got to pay to the housing too.
Okay, let's shift to our focus groups.